Okay. So, welcome to Informed to Perform meets Educated Equine. So, this is Anita Miles.
Hello.
I'm going to let her introduce herself. So, Anita, tell us a bit about yourself, about what you do, what your job. Start with what your job is, then we'll move on to what exactly Educated Equine is in a second.
Okay. So, I sort of work under the title of equine physiotherapist, but my primary training was osteopathy. So first off, I trained as an osteopath, then I trained as a physio, and my everyday job is that I go out on the road, I treat horses. I used to treat dogs. I don't treat dogs so much anymore. I think it's, work where your passion is. My passion is in horses. So my clinic is solely equine now. I've spent the last few years as well delving quite deeply into sort of the biomechanics and the movement patterns of horses and lameness and rehabilitation. So when I go out to treat a horse now, I'm combining all those things, looking at them from the biomechanical view, looking at them from a lameness point of view, and then treatment wise, combining the osteopathy and the physiotherapy as well. And then, putting into action sort of groundwork plans, ridden exercise plans. So hopefully trying to rehabilitate some of those lame horses, hopefully prevent some lameness in some of the younger ones. Maybe the older horses, we like to just keep them going. And actually it's quite amazing with some of the older ones where actually, they can keep going a lot longer than, a lot of people think. They sort of go, oh, he's 16, he's a veteran. Well, if you, can train him properly, he'll be going till he's 26. So, but yeah, on a daily basis, that's what I do. I'm physio, work under the title of physio. It's the title that vets like, it's the title that people recognize. When I trained as an osteo about 16, 17 years ago, osteopath was a little bit sort of like, oh, but you're not physio. So my training in physio has been brilliant. But it was something that was more recognized. It was quite difficult in the beginning it was hard graft getting a business together under the title of osteopath. Whereas today it's fine. It's not a problem. Things have moved on, things have progressed. So.
And when you're in terms of your treatment, what are the techniques you mostly use? Is it kind of hands-on? Do you use any of that? Because obviously a lot of the physios I've seen use quite a lot of the kind of electronic, lasers and ultrasound and sort of pens machine type type things. Are you more hands-on or are you more down the machine route or a bit of both?
So the osteopathy route is hands-on. So the sort of the age-old thing in osteopathy is that the body has everything it needs within it to heal and to maintain homeostasis, equilibrium, balance. If skeletally the body is in the right, it is aligned. So they are not really a fan of electrotherapies. So things like H-wave laser, ultrasound, whatever. So initially, completely trained in hands-on and joint mobilization, manipulation. And then the physios, you go down the electrotherapy route a bit more in the physiotherapy training. So very much, they use a lot of ultrasound, they use quite a lot of laser. Some use their H-wave machine an awful lot, which is muscle stim. I use my long wave ultrasound a lot. I like my red light devices. I'm not a fan of H-wave. I have friends who are physios who use nothing but their H-wave. It's very much personal preference. And the weird thing is that if I go out to treat a horse, I don't go there with any sort of plan. You know, I don't go there thinking I put my H-wave on every horse, or I put my ultrasound on every horse, or, you know, I don't go there. I get out of the car and I go and look at the horse and I assess the horse. And I don't know how I make the decision of what I'm going to do when I treat that horse. But interestingly, some horses I treat solely with osteopathy, and some horses I'll treat solely from a physio point of view, but hands-on physio, soft tissue, myofascial, again, any sort of gentle mobilization. And then some others I'll solely think, God, you know, I need to treat these with ultrasound, and then, you know, with, you know, other techniques. So I might use the ultrasound, but then use some osteopathic techniques and then some physio technique. It really depends entirely on the horse in front of you. There are some horses, I've had the odd horse where they just won't tolerate things like muscle stim. I've had a couple where they won't tolerate the ultrasound, but that's not so many. A few that won't tolerate the electro stim, but you know, I don't know how I make the decision. It's solely when you've put your hands on that horse and something tells you what you need to do. But I generally sort of combine, or I have all the tools in the kit. It's whichever ones I pull out on the day, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's interesting, isn't it? Because like you say, because you do have very much both modalities there, it's quite interesting to hear how you integrate them, because I say a lot of the people who are, as I say, just vet phys, I don't mean that with any disrespect, but that's what their toolkit is. It's interesting to hear the difference. And so in your assessment of a horse, what does that entail? So what is your kind of
so when I get to a yard, I'll always see the horse walk and trot. I'll always see them walk in a straight line on the hard, trot in a straight line on the hard. We'll often turn a few circles, some, you know, reverse them. We're assessing footfall, looking for lameness, looking for symmetries, asymmetries in the body. I'm also listening, heaviness of the footfalls. You know, you'll have a horse that will come out of the box and be slamming one leg down. You know, you'll really hear one foot land, but you'll think, God, the other three are relatively light. So why is it overloading that one? Quite often, the most telling few steps for me are the ones as the horse is pulled out of the box. So as it's stood in the box and then it's pulled out, you see an awful lot then, because it's, you know, it has been standing still. It may have stiffened up a little bit. If there's a lameness, you'll often see it in those first couple of strides, or you'll see it as it comes out of the box and they turn it down the corridor of the yard. So I will watch them right from the minute that they leave the box. We'll watch them on as I say, walk and trot on the hard in a straight line. I'll often see them just popped on the lunge if I think there's any sort of lameness issue, or I'm not 100% sure. Sometimes I pick something up and I think, I don't know. We'll pop them on the lunge on the soft, or we'll trot them up on the soft, because you'll get a different, you know, you'll see different things on a soft ground than you will on the hard ground. You know, so for instance, a horse with a sore suspensory, you might not necessarily see a lot on the hards, because, you know, it's hard ground, but you put them in a soft surface, and you're going, yeah, that horse is short there. That horse is short on that left hind, right hind, whichever. You know, and also you might not necessarily pick up on a horse that's got a suspensory issue unless you popped it on the lunge. Yeah. So, you know, I'll often see them on the lunge. Sometimes I see people ride them, because we'll trot them up and we'll lunge them, and I'll say, I can't see anything wrong with them. And they're saying, but it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that, and blah, blah. So sometimes we'll see them ridden. I'm not a saddler by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know, have been around horses long enough to be able to say, that is shocking, get a saddler, or I don't think it's an issue, but I think you should get it checked, or, you know, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm not loving that on that horse. So we'll often look at the saddle. You know, I'll always ask things like, have they had teeth done? If they look a bit footy or a little bit off, when were they last shod? You know, sometimes some can be a little bit off if they've just been shod, especially perhaps laminitic ponies and things like that. So we'll do all of that. And then I'll quite often, you know, I will watch people ride their horses. And and get them to show me what it is that they're having the problem with. And then obviously, you know, if I think it's something that perhaps needs, it looks as though it's in the mouth, perhaps I'll say get the dentist with a bit fitter, or, you know, maybe if I think it's a saddle issue, get your saddler back out, you know, so try and work with everybody. I'll quite often speak to instructors if, you know, they're having an issue, and the instructors are also having an issue with trying to get a rider over this, but I can't necessarily find anything wrong with the horse, and see whether we can't have a bit of a plan to see, you know, because sometimes it's the rider, it's not the horse. Sometimes it is the rider. But yeah, so, you know, the assessment initially, especially on a horse I haven't seen before, you know, is quite, you know, there's a lot of information to take on. And I mean, luckily I seem to be quite okay at storing it as it's, but yeah, so it's getting all of that and taking a real history as well, you know, are the horses on any medication? Because sometimes you have to be a little bit careful with some of the lasers with horses on certain medication. Are they under the vet for any lameness? They had any operations, had any illnesses, done a tendon, broken a leg, you know, and it's quite surprising what people forget.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, people will forget that the horse did a tendon, and then I'll feel its legs and say, but it's done a tendon. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, when I did my coaching, like the UKCC assessments, you ask anyway, but in those you have to ask, obviously, any rider in, you know, old rider injuries or horse injuries. They're like, no, I'm fine. And you kind of say, you know, plates, pins, bone breaks that you've had. Oh, well, I have got my ankles all plated up, and like blah blah blah. It's all so long ago, they're not thinking of that as being like a current thing. It's like, I do kind of need to know that. That's,
yeah, you're like, that is an injury.
that counts, yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny, isn't it? Cool. So I guess the next question is, obviously, the concept that's sort of now become Educated Equine. Why did it start? How did it start? What is it, and where are you going with it? I guess is sort of
okay, so about maybe 5 years ago now. So although I love my job every day, and I never get up thinking, oh God, you know, we've all had jobs, so we think, geez, do I have to go? And I don't get up every day thinking I hate it, but I started to sort of feel a bit, I don't know, a bit sort of like, oh, this is really hard work. From the point of view of, you know, seeing so many horses that were lame, so many horses that were being medicated all the time, speaking to so many owners that would say things to me like, yeah, this horse has had a flexor tendon injury. And I'd say, which flexor tendon? And they'd say, the one in the leg. And I'd say, right, well, there's two in every leg. Oh, you know, which tendon, which leg? You know, and they'd have to go around and feel all the legs and try and work out which tendon was, because they don't know. And then they say things to me like, so this horse has navicular. And I say, oh, okay. And we go like a few minutes down the line with my questioning, and then they'd say, what is navicular? And I was thinking, oh my God, you know, if they don't know how they got to this horse having the injury, they don't know what the injury is. So how are they going to help this horse, you know, overcome this and be better the other side of it, and hopefully not re-injure this? So I really wanted to educate horse owners, riders, more about the anatomy and the physiology and the biomechanics of the horses, because there are more lame horses than there are sound horses. And, you know, I don't think that's really acceptable. I think that's horrendous. And there's an awful lot of medicating joints. And I've had an awful lot of people say to me, yeah, but it's always been like that. And I've had people tell me that, you know, the rider isn't capable of the horse being any better than it is. And I'm like, rubbish. You know, everybody has the potential to learn, and everybody has the potential to, you know, be better. And you just have to want to, and put in that bit of commitment to it. And sometimes I don't even think it's the owners of the horses that were not wanting to learn. I think it's almost that maybe in some yards they were in and things, it's easier to keep people where they are and not necessarily encourage them to it was just driving me nuts. And I just thought, all these poor horses that are, they're just medicated time and time again, every 3 months, every 6 months, oh, it's fine, we just medicate him, he's fine. And I wanted people to know that doesn't have to be the case. I'm not saying that horses shouldn't be medicated or that they shouldn't have a bute, but you have to be doing it for the right reasons. And in my mind, you medicate. So, I have a horse with kissing spine, I medicate him. So I'm not saying you don't medicate horses, but, I've medicated him a couple of times to take the pain away. So I have a window of opportunity to retrain his muscular function and put him in a more functional place so that he's not heavy on his forehand. He's not leaning on the base of his neck. So he's not lowering his trunk between his shoulders. So he's not compressing his spine. I've trained him to have a more conditioned thoracic sling, to lift his trunk. So he's, I've decompressed his spine, but I've used the painkillers. I've taken advantage of the painkillers and used that window of opportunity. I don't use it for performance enhancing. And that was starting to irritate me, that it was becoming completely acceptable to jab horses because, we jab them because we want to compete them. Nobody was saying, why are all these horses becoming lame? Why have they all got sore hocks? Why have they all got sore SIs? Why have so many horses got neck arthritis? Nobody's asking why. And I just feel that if owners have a bit more, information, a bit more knowledge, they can sort of start to question these things and perhaps say, well, I don't really want to do that. I don't really want to put loads of drugs into him. I want to be able to rehabilitate him. I want him to be happier and more comfortable and more functional and not have to have the drugs. I mean, you can't always get there, but, there are quite a few that, in my opinion, don't need all those jabs. So that was my thing. I wanted to educate people about the anatomy, about, I just feel that if they have a bit of knowledge, they can make a more informed decision. And also because I think if people are saying things to me like, oh, the horse has got navicular, what is navicular? And I say, when was it diagnosed with navicular? Oh, 6 months ago, right? So you've sat on that for 6 months, you don't really know what it is. So I think, well, why aren't they asking their vets? Because the vets that I know, if you were to ask them they love to tell you what it is. But then I think sometimes maybe on the day when you're given that information and it's all a bit, oh my God, my horse has got navicular. And back in the day, navicular used to be, like when people are told their horses have kissing spine, they go into meltdown like, oh my God, he's going to be shot, I just think, it would help them to know, the whole thing, the whole situation, and to be able to just understand a bit better and just benefit their horses a bit more because they know what's going on and they can understand perhaps why that happened and then perhaps how they can help it.
No, I mean, and I mean, we've chatted a bit about this before, and anyone who's currently working with me, so Mags will definitely know this, and a few other people that will be watching this, the things that you're doing then hopefully make my job easier as a coach as well, because it's the same thing when you've got people who, you've got a horse because you want to go out competing, we want to do this and this, and that's fine, I get that, and I don't, absolutely people want to have a horse do a job, but if we can develop the basics really well, build the foundations up really well, and make sure that we've got all that in place before they go off competing and doing everything, then that 6-12 months, depending on the horse, it might even only be 3 months, depending on where it started and how it started in the first place, it's going to be really well spent, because then you've got years ahead of you
Absolutely.
Having to take the time off rather than get cracking, go, things go wrong, and then you have to go all the way back to square one at some point anyway. So why not start, why not start at square one?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the trouble is that, say for instance, a horse with kissing spine is always a horse in rehab. I'm not saying you can't ever compete that horse, but it's always a horse in rehab because, there was a reason why it ended up with kissing spine. So, you're always having to, every day that you ride that horse, make sure that that horse is not reverting back to old ways. You have to make sure every day. And, out of choice, would I have my horse with kissing spine, or would I have picked him up as a 3-year-old before anybody sat on him and do what I know now with him then? Yes. I just, I love him. I adore him. I just wish he wasn't broken, and I just think, oh God, if that could have been picked up on when he was younger, he probably would have never developed the kissing spine. He's just a big heavy horse on his forehand, and he just was ridden and allowed to go on his forehand. And so, he's got really low in the trunk and he's compressed his spine and he's ended up with kissing spine. And actually, if as a young horse, he'd been trained to have a conditioned thoracic sling and to use his back muscles efficiently, he probably may never have got the kissing spine. But, and I say to people, those horses that you rehab for kissing spine, you can't, like, so if they're hunters or they're eventers or something, we don't do it so much now. We used to event all summer and chuck them out for the winter, hunt all winter, chuck them out for the summer. We tend to not do that so much anymore. And in some ways, for the horses that have been rehabilitated from something quite big, like suspensory injury or kissing spine, the ticking over thing is good for them. And I say to these people, you pour this work in to get this horse perhaps that's got the kissing spine back to competition. You have to keep that horse at a level of work. You can't chuck it in the field for 3 months, 6 months and say, I'll pick him up, because you're back to square one. So, it's a far more commitment to rehabilitate the horse than it is to do the good work in the beginning with a young horse.
Totally makes sense. So you talked a little bit about kind of obviously lamenesses, but almost, we all know what a lameness is, when you can literally see a horse that is nodding and taking a next step. But you mentioned, so the term you used was dysfunction, horses moving in dysfunction. So just explain kind of what do you mean by dysfunction for anyone listening or watching? What do you mean by dysfunction? And then I suppose then we go on to how do we prevent dysfunction? What sort of things can we do then to prevent it or to correct it, I suppose, as well?
Yeah, so the dysfunction side of it's quite interesting because none of us are born completely symmetrical. So, we've all got an element of asymmetry. And, whether we were just born with a bit of an asymmetry or whether, we've had sort of accidents and things and broken a bone or blah, blah, we compensate for those things. And our brains are amazing at saying, oh, that part of our body is injured, but we still need the rest to function, to survive. So they kind of close off on that bit, shut down a little bit. Your brain sort of, I suppose you might say it has like skeleton staff on working in that department, and the rest is working overly hard. But the thing that the brain's not very good at is when that thing fixes, mends, the brain goes, oh, we can go back to using that. The brain says, well, we're kind of all right doing this. We're right here. We're just going to carry on doing this. So, but you've become used to the way you've done things now. You're used to it. It's become your norm. It's become your sort of blueprint, your functional pattern. You are functioning, but you are functioning with a dysfunctional body. So, it's recognizing those things in the horses, and those things will be, perhaps when you watch the pelvis, one side will be higher than the other. You'll hear one foot land heavier than the other. Some horses will swing, they'll have a circumduction of a hind limb, or they'll bring it across to the midline. They're all dysfunction. They're things that, the musculature of the body isn't functioning in a nice symmetrical way. And so, that is the dysfunction that we're looking at. It's quite difficult sometimes to try and explain that to people, because dysfunction technically is a lameness. It's the beginning of a lameness. It's where things start. So that's where the first signs of you noticing something like that is really where you need to start thinking, oh, hang on, there's something here that's not quite right. So horses that carry tails quite heavily to one side, that's quite a red flag for dysfunction in the back muscles. And yet I know people that say, oh, he's always done that, it's fine. And, it's not. And when you break it down and I say, okay, so your horse carries its tail, up and over to the right. So he's probably going to have trouble getting the left hind under. You're probably going to find he prefers to go, he feels like he leans in too much on the right rein, overbends the neck to the right. He'll feel better to the left because he's more upright, but, getting the left hind under. And, they look at me and go, how do you know that? The amount of times I describe to somebody what the horse is like to ride. I've never sat on the horse.
Yeah.
And I say, because I can see the dysfunction. I can see the dysfunction. So I can tell you biomechanically where that's a failure, that's breaking down. The system's not quite working as it should. Oh, I just thought he'd always been like that. I just thought he was a bit green, or he's a bit stiff, or he's a bit old now, or, and actually it probably initially started as a very small asymmetry that wasn't picked up on in maybe 4 or 5 year olds. And they've done as much as they can to function with a dysfunction, compensating all the way. And then it's not picked up until that horse is nodding lame, or a tendon goes, or but that horse has been lame for quite some while. It's been dysfunctional. And I think we need to start looking at dysfunction as it's like the prerequisite for lameness is dysfunction, but it's accepted that the horse has it goes better one way than the other. Oh, he's always bucked on the canter that way. Oh, he's always held his tail that way. Or, it sort of slips through the net, those things. And we think lameness is just simply when the horse is very obviously nodding. But it's not. It comes way before that. What was the second bit of the question?
I guess, well, actually, so to be fair, I guess change it slightly is, and I guess this is going to be quite a tricky question to answer, but what are some of the most common dysfunctions you're going to see in horses, like sort of more general stuff? So yes, okay, I know there's like tail being held to one side is quite a thing, but obviously one of the things you mentioned quite a lot is the thoracic sling, is general asymmetries in back muscle, which you can show by maybe the fact that one of the hind limbs is circumducting, or that the tail is being held to one side. And so what are the things you often see, which the symptoms of it could be all sorts of different things, but the general things you see quite a lot in practice, I suppose?
So the things that you'll see most regularly are dips behind the shoulders. You'll have horses that look like they're sort of scooped out behind the shoulder. That's a sign that they're not lifting the thorax and working well over the back. And that they won't be lifting the thorax if the thoracic sling is dysfunctional or is weak. Quite classically, we'll see that horses have one shoulder much bigger than the other. Again, and that is because they've got rotation in the thorax. So they've probably got one side that's more dominant. And so you get this going on. So you get one limb that's the power and one that's, taking all the weight and propping, and you'll get this limb will be quite you'll get an odd muscular pattern. You'll get musculature of this one that's obviously working quite hard, and this one that's being your sort of stop, your balance, and you'll often find like the deltoid will be quite overbuilt, and you'll find that ventral aspects of underside of the neck can be very overbuilt here. And you'll find that they're not so built on the more dorsal upper aspect of the neck. They're quite classic things to see. Horses that work with a hollow back, but then do that sort of, oh yeah, I'm on the bit, and put their chin very overbuilt behind the pole. You'll see that especially in a horse that's been So some producing yards will use things like draw reins and bungee things to lunge in, and those young horses are quite, it's like two little half eggs and you can just behind the pole. You know, so they're the sorts of things that, you know, you see that for me, I'm like, I'm very, very overdeveloped hamstrings in horses. Horses with not a lot of glute, not a lot of hindquarter, a lot of hamstring. I'm like, there's a lot of extension in this, this lumbar and pelvic region. And those horses are just, you know, pushing and vaulting off of the limbs rather than having that nice compression and, you know, the elasticity, using the elastic energy in the tendons. They're just, you know, vaulting over the limbs. So they're kind of the, you know, the very classic muscular imbalances that you'll see. Something that I really like people to do is stand your horse square, or as square as it possibly can. I mean, some horses just can't stand square. And get someone to hold its head and make sure its neck is straight. And the very interesting thing about that is then you get a box or something, stand up behind it. Obviously don't get kicked. Tell it you're going there. Don't just appear behind it. And you look down onto the shoulders, look at the rib cage. You'll often see the rib cage, one side is higher than the other. You'll see perhaps there's more of a dip behind this shoulder. This one's bigger built in the more sort of in the front of the shoulder more. And you can see an awful lot by standing up behind your horse and having a look down. And then if you sort of think about that, you know, so perhaps if the ribs appear to be dropped on the right and sort of elevated on the left, and you think, well, hang on a minute, I always feel like I'm sat to the right, you know, and that horse, you know, always feels like it's falling into the right. Well, that actually that, you know, that horse's thorax is completely rotated. And you know, the work you need to do is to try and get that rotation straightened. And, you know, that is through targeted exercises, you know, for the muscle groups. But it's, standing up behind your horse is very, very interesting sometimes. And for some people quite horrifying, because they'll see things that they've not seen before.
But like I say, something that's well worth doing, both, I guess, from, you know, just an eye-opener at the beginning. And then also, you know, take some pictures of it as well, because then when you do start to do the correct work and you start to get them going better, you know, you then can see it's not just like, oh, I think it's a bit better. It feels a bit better. You can physically look again and take more photos and be like, oh, it has actually rotated back the other way. It has actually developed muscle where it didn't have it. And, oh, that overdeveloped muscle has started to
now disappearing a little bit.
The coaching that I do, like there's some horses that we changed the shape of quite considerably, and I sometimes think, oh, I really wish I'd taken it before, you know, when we first started working. Why did we not?
I just don't remember at the time. You know, I get so excited about what we can do for this horse, and then 6-8 weeks down the line, I think, oh, I should have really taken a picture of that. That would have been a great one. But even my own horse, I don't take enough pictures. You know, I just think, oh, you know, I got to get on with it, you know, time wise and stuff, and just it's important to just get the work done, and I don't take the pictures. But yeah, it is really interesting, really important to take pictures. And the other thing that's quite interesting is when you ask somebody, oh, put their neck straight, because, you know, the horse will be like that, and you say put their neck straight, and they'll put their neck straight sort of like, you know, a quarter, and I say no, straight is there, and they're like, oh, is it? And you know, and often when you put the horse's neck straight, you then see what's going on behind, and you'll see some horses that literally look like they're an S bend. I'm like, how does this feel? Does this feel like completely discombobulated in the canter? And they're like, yeah, I can't canter for toffee. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, it's because it's just like this. You think, oh.
But I think everyone's so keen to, you know, if their horses are a certain age or a certain level of fitness or a certain stage in their training, I think there's always that feeling of pressure to be doing, you know, the jumps have got to start to get bigger. They should be cantering by now. They should be, you know, all those sort of should things they should be doing. It's like, it should be doing whatever is going to benefit it now. And then actually, like I said before, often if the canter is really hard, and I've said this to a few times, but if the canter is really hard work at the moment, leave it alone.
Don't do it.
Do other stuff, and then all of a sudden you'll ask for canter again, and it's like you've been training the canter for 6 months.
Yeah.
You've trained everything else to get better, and then the canter just goes, oh, there it is. Because
I've got a client that I teach, and her horse, very, very, I mean, it's got the weakest thoracic sling you've ever seen. It could get into canter and very, very easily, which I was a bit surprised about, but it couldn't get out. It couldn't get out of canter. And I've never seen a horse do this. It would canter slower, and it was basically cantering at like walk pace, and it just couldn't get out of canter. And she'd had lessons with people who were basically trying to teach her how to get it out of canter. And I said, we're not even going to bother. I said, because it's got so much else wrong with it. We're just going to work on that thoracic sling. We're going to work on that back function. And then one day I said to her, just pop him into canter. And she did. I said, and I'll bring him back to trot. And he just went back to trot. And she was like, oh my God. And I said, he just didn't have the balance. He didn't have the strength. He didn't have the coordination to be able to get out of canter. But people have been trying to teach him how to get out of canter. Didn't need to be, he knows how to get out of canter. He's a horse, you know? I was like, he just needed strength. He needed to be taught how to use his body more effectively in walk and trot to benefit the canter.
Yeah. So you've mentioned, so for anyone who doesn't know what the thoracic sling is, now I know you've done a webinar on this, I'm not expecting you to cover it in great detail, but just explain briefly to anyone who doesn't quite understand the thoracic sling or quite know what it entails and what its job is, what that is.
Okay, so thoracic sling is a group of muscles that attach the forelimb of the horse to the trunk, to the body. There's no bony attachment between the front legs and the body. So where we have collarbones, horses don't have a collarbone. So everything is attached by soft tissue. And the thoracic sling muscles basically have attachment on the body and attachment on the inner side, so obviously to attach the limb to the body, and they're there to support the body and to lift the body, but a lot of our horses are very weak in those muscles, and we see a lot of horses that are quite low in the trunk. And when you see those dips behind, so especially in thoroughbred types, you'll see they've got like the ice cream scoops out of each side. They don't have to be like that. Yes, they might have high wither, but they certainly don't need to be quite as high as they are. And that is because they've dropped the whole body, the thorax, between the shoulder blades. So the shoulder blades stay here and the body drops down here. And these muscles then basically are just using for stabilizing. And you'll see a lot of those horses when you stand them up in the box as well. They'll stand, if you look at where the point of the shoulder is, and you run a line down, the hoof is way behind. They stand with the feet almost back at sort of the girth line in some cases. And again, that's showing that the body is dropped between the shoulder blades. Those thoracic sling muscles are literally just stabilizing, balancing a bit, going, oh God, we're on the forehand, and you're quite heavy at 500 kilos, and hey, whereas they should be developed and they should be able to work, and you should be able to have, so that left side would would contract and rotate the thorax to the right, and vice versa, and they should be able to contract and take the weight back, and they're there very much for supporting the thorax and for balancing the horse and for lifting the forehand. But in many, many horses, they're way too weak. And I actually think that a lot of that problem is that in young horses, we don't target those muscles, and we're too inclined to ride young horses with their heads low. I'm not saying you want the heads up. I'm not saying we want to ride them in some sort of Grand Prix outline, but for me, the whole long and low thing, I don't think has helped. I personally never ride a horse with its head long and low. It doesn't do anything for me. What you'll see with horses that are ridden with long and low head carriage is the hoof back under by the girth. So instead of having that sort of spring action of the tendons and of the limbs, pinging the horse back up for upward propulsion, it's landing at that angle. You're not getting the spring, you're losing the impulse, the elastic energy, and the horse is just vaulting one, body over one limb than the other. So I think in most of the young horses, or in all the young horses, we should be aiming to strengthen the thoracic sling, and I think we shouldn't particularly put their heads down. And gizmos and gadgets, I'm not for any of those either. You'll have a lot of physios that will prescribe pursuers and things, and not me.
So again, not giving away everything, but what sort of exercises, can we do that can help strengthen the thoracic sling and help to give them that lift, that?
Yeah, so a lot of it is being able to take the weight back. And I remember the first time that I was really sort of introduced to it, which was about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was in a clinic, and the guy teaching, who was Jean-Luc from the Science of Motion, and he just pushed my horse in the sternum a little bit, tickled him there, and said, do you feel that? And the horse moved its thorax backwards. Now, the horse didn't move it hugely, because this is my kissing spine horse that was, desperately heavy on the forehand. And but when I sat up there, it felt huge. The feeling that horse adjust itself without moving its feet felt huge. And when I watched it back on the video, I basically couldn't see it on the video, and I was like, it felt massive. And when I think now about how much that horse actually, shifted its center of gravity compared with what it can do now, it wasn't a lot. It was that I really wasn't used to that feeling. I was used to that feeling where the horse would walk forward and vault forward. Whereas now I'm used to the feeling where the horse comes up to come forward. And, if that horse goes to vault forward, I stop him and say, no, we don't do it like that, do we? Afraid not, mate. So it's about getting the horses to be able to take the weight back. And the balance through movement exercises are very good for this. It's also about, getting the horses to abduct, so stepping sideways, getting the shoulders moving. I think the ridden work is things like shoulder in and half pass and things like that. But what I found is, when I say that to some people, they're terrified, because they say, I can't ride a half pass because that's a medium dressage. I don't even know, whatever standard. It's a medium, I got it right. A medium dressage. And, and I say to people, well, not really, because if the way I look at it is, if you watch the horses in the field, and if they get spooked by something, or they're excited and they're playing, they do all those movements. Those movements do not belong to dressage. Those movements belong to the horse. Dressage stole them.
I have a video of one of my horses being she always gets turned out. She always rolls and gets up and, has a bit of a moment. And she's literally doing half pass bucking across the field. It is beautiful half pass. It's true left crossover while she's bucking. So yeah, exactly. She knows exactly how to move her body.
Exactly. And I say to people, that those movements, don't think those movements are dressage only for people that, the horses are capable of doing those. Those movements belong to the horse. The horses do them naturally. And, I said to somebody the other day, I said, half pass is, if you want a half pass left, you get your horse to bend. So if you're going left, you bend, you ask for a bit of rotation through the spine left, and you get it to step left. It's movement in the direction of bend.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, that's quite easy. Yeah. So I don't call them half pass or pirouette, because it blows people's minds. But, in the ridden work, they're the sorts of things that we do. But you have to be able to feel where the rotation of the thorax is.
Yeah.
If you cannot feel where the rotation of the thorax is, then, you know, you're in danger of having that horse bent left, rotated right, and traveling left, which puts a torsion and a compression into the spine, and the facet joints, which obviously is not desirable. You know, we don't want that, because that is how we get arthritis. You know, too much compression in joints is how we get arthritic changes. So you very much have to be able to feel that rotation. And I find there are a lot of people that struggle to feel that.
How would you do? Because I know what you mean by this. So how would you explain that feeling to somebody? How would you explain that? You know, when you've got, so for instance, going a bit more sort of from the coach's perspective now, I often see it where you can see the horse is totally blocking through the rib. You know, you've got the left, you're trying to get left bend, say for instance, or left flexion, whatever, and you can see the horse is totally blocking there. And there's that kind of moment where you just sort of, from the ground, I see them kind of go, and it's like the whole body just relaxes and drops the other way, and you're just like that, and the inside hind leg can suddenly step through, and you're like, did you feel it? Did you? Please.
Yeah. I think we've been misled in how we've been, and how the description of what's going on. So we've been told bend. So we're led to believe that the spine bends, and it doesn't. The biggest amount of movement in the spine is rotation.
Yeah.
So and it can't. I've got some thoracic spine here somewhere, and when you have two thoracic vertebrae, and obviously they've got their little dorsal processes between those, so they've got one articular surface here and one there, and your rib, one rib, where's a rib? Here's a rib. Just randomly have a rib on the desk.
What's she doing?
This is a pony rib, a real pony. See, it's got two surfaces. So that articulates on one thoracic vertebrae, and that articulates on the preceding one. So, and they sit in a bit like that. They're a bit sort of at an angle. So if that is between two vertebrae, how is it going to fold and bend? It can't. It physically can't. There's a structure. It's quite a strong bit of bone. It's not just going to move out the way. Let me see if I can find randomly on my desk. There we go. Put them together the right way.
Love this. Just randomly pick up a couple of bits of
randomly got a pony in my house. Good job, he's only 11 too. So there's two thoracic vertebrae. I don't know how well you guys can see this. But those surfaces there are the surfaces where the ribs join. So that surface on that one, and this surface here on this one. And so these bones are not for this rib. It's a different pony, but they fit in between. So we can't have this going on.
No.
And also through that hole is your spinal cord. So if we have this, you're going to damage the spinal cord. And it's the same thing with when people say to me about horses with kissing spine, or they say, oh, we need it to lift and open the back. And they say, it does that. It doesn't, because you just paralyzed it. You know, it can't. You know, that's your central nervous system running through there. Your body is ultimately going to want to protect that, because that is life or death. That is, you know, walking or not. That is, you know, so your body is at all costs going to try and prevent that and that. So I think personally that when we've been led to believe that you can kick your horse in the side and move its ribs and get things like this going on, it causes your horse to go into protection and go, oh God, I really don't actually, you know, I don't actually want to quite do it, and I physically can't. Whereas if we were all informed from an early age that what we need to train is the thoracic sling to lift the thorax, so we lift and then the spine rotates, the feeling of bend comes because you've made space for the hind limb to come under.
Yeah.
So, it's a feeling of bend. It's not necessarily a massive bend. It feels massive because the hind limb's powerful. It feels massive because the force is massive, but, or big force that's got to be managed by the horse and by you. But it's, it's not that the spine bends like this, it doesn't fold in any way. So it's actually quite a rigid structure. And when you think about it, it needs to be, because it needs to protect the spinal cord. It needs to protect the nerves. So, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, for me, what I really want people to know is that lift and rotation are, we need to stop talking about bending and bending it in the ribs. We don't want to bend it in the ribs. It'd be quite painful. So I think terminology has let us down, and terminology then is like Chinese whispers, isn't it? It goes on and it becomes something else and becomes something else, and we need to go back and say, well, actually it's not that, it's this. But people don't like that. They don't like being told it's not something they think it is. So that's a big hurdle to get over.
And that's interesting, actually, because I often describe the whole, we can do this, we can actually flex our spine in a way that they can't. But I don't think I think even just that little snippet has given me more tools to explain better what, I know what we're not doing, but I maybe haven't explained well enough when I'm coaching because I know I think I explain what it feels like we're doing, which it often does feel like you kind of lift and move the rib cage, which you are, because you're lifting it as a whole and kind of almost, you know what I mean? But I don't think I've explained it as well as I could.
It's like a lift. You need it to lift and rotate. It doesn't bend.
It's not there. Which I don't think bend.
I mean, I think there was a study. I'd have to look it up exactly who it was, but they discovered that at the level of each joint, thoracic joint, there's about 2 to 3 millimeters of lateral movement. So that's not a lot. So what's actually available throughout the entire spine is about 2 inches, which really isn't very much. When you think, longitudinally of the horse, 2 inches isn't huge, because you've got a couple millimeters at, sort of 18, 19 different places. It's not a lot at each joint. But yet we're sort of led to believe it's like the old snakes, and that they, because if they did move, like I say to people, when you have this idea with rehabilitating the kissing spine horse, that the spine can do that, we'd need to have cogs in here. It would need to be like a cogs type thing. And we don't. We've got flat surfaces, and flat surfaces suggest there isn't much movement. Because if you've got a big surface like a ball and socket, like in a hip, it suggests there's a lot of movement. A flat surface would suggest there's not huge amounts of movement. So it's also, I want, from my point of view with the Educated Equine, I want people to be able to see the skeleton. I want people to be able to, and when I give people a navicular bone, they're really disappointed that it's so small and looks rubbish. They think it's something awesome because horses have navicular, and I'm like, it's like this thing, and they go, but we now know it's not just the bone. Navicular involves everything around it. It involves the tendon, and Gemma's disappeared.
Sorry, I had to just turn my video for a second.
It involves, the tendon and the bursa and the ligament and the bone, and where the navicular bone articulates with the pedal bone. And, so we now know that it's not just degeneration in the bone. And so now it's called navicular syndrome, because it covers all of those things. And in some horses, it's the bursa that's inflamed, and in some horses it's the deep digital flexor tendon that's showing degeneration and has got holes in and inflammation. And in some horses, the navicular bone has spurs growing on it, which are then damaging the DDFT. So we know it's not the same in every horse, whereas we used to think it was just the bone degenerating. But yeah, that's very disappointing. People are really disappointed. It's just that little thing that looks like a little boat and that's it. But, you know, I want them to see the skeleton. I want them to touch it and pick it up and, you know, see what can move and what can't move. And, you know, I think that's quite important. You know, that lots of horse owners have very little idea of what the inside of the horse looks like.
Yeah.
You know, so, and I sort of think, you know, it's a bit like having a car. And someone said to me, yeah, but if you drive a car, you know, you don't need to know, you don't have to be a mechanic to drive a car. And I said, yeah, but it hasn't got any feelings. I don't care if it's broken, it doesn't hurt. You know, we fix it. But, you know, it does matter to the horses because they're living, breathing, feeling creatures.
Well, it's interesting you say about the whole people not knowing where things are. I remember having a client who, because I am actually qualified massage as well. I don't really do it as my business. I just don't know horses really, mostly. But and he said, "Oh, man, it's really hard bit in its neck. You know, it's like a real knotty bit here. So I've been giving it a good old massage." I was like, "That's its spine." That's basic. I was like, "That's basically its spine that you were just trying to manipulate there." That's what
I had a lady today who said to me, "What's this lump in its neck?" And I said, "That's a bone.
Yeah,
that should be there. That's okay." But she noticed there was something there, whereas, you know, a lot of people don't. Or, you know, the other thing that's quite interesting as well is how many people think that the vertebrae in the neck go from the ears to the wither, straight across just under the mane. And they don't realize that they go from behind the ears in an S shape and down between the shoulder blades, you know, into the chest.
Yeah.
You know, when you draw those on, or when I've got a neck and I've held it up next to a horse and said, that's where it sits, you know, people think it runs along the top. So, you know, I think it's important that people know, you know, they're quite complicated creatures. They're quite delicate creatures. They have tendency to break themselves. And I think it's useful to owners to have that little bit more anatomy knowledge to, you know, be able to know what's going on. I mean, I personally, if I don't know something, I go and look it up. But lots of people don't. They just sort of take that what they're told. Oh, it's done a tendon. Oh, okay. They don't ask which tendon or which leg or.
And I think they don't know what they don't know almost. I think if that's not been, I'm the same, I tend to like to know things, but if you're not that type of person, like that generally kind of looks for that info, you don't know what you don't know, so you don't necessarily even know the right questions to ask or the right people to ask. Or
no, exactly. It's it is quite an interesting. It's getting quite interesting. People are very interested in the skeleton. You know, lots of people, you know, they want to touch it and pick it up. And, you know, I did a workshop with some pony club kids and made them build legs and things. And, you know, so they had to put the bones together. And, you know, it was quite hilarious how halfway through one of the girls said, "This isn't a real horse though, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Where did you get him?" I was like, "Well, never mind that, just build his legs." And then of course she went and looked at his skull and she said, "Why has he got a hole in the middle?" I was like, "Don't ask silly questions, build its legs."
Don't worry about that bit, that's fine. We don't need to know.
She had this sudden realization that it was actually real bones from a real horse. But, you know, once she got over that, she was like, "Oh, this is awesome," you know, and they built his legs and, you know, put his front legs back together. And and then I made them label everything. And, you know, it was really good for them actually to, you know.
I think one of my favourite realizations that people have when they look at legs is that we're standing on our middle, you know, the horses are basically standing on their middle fingers. You know, I think that's one of my favourite things that people suddenly are like, hang on. So the knee, the knee's not the, no. The knee is way further down the arm than you think it is. The knee is the wrist. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, no. It's
standing on the finger.
It's like they're standing like this. That's basically what they're standing on.
And I mean, that's quite a bad design, really, isn't it? I mean, terrible design, really.
Well, especially for what we use them for, I guess. So there's just been a quick question. So obviously you mentioned a bit about thoracic sling and work from the horse. in terms of groundwork with young horses. So you did mention the balance through movement, which people can find on Facebook and
no, it's a good I think it's a really good basis to start with. Because so I did a lot of my training through the science of motion, and that's not easy to understand, and it took me quite a few years to understand that people don't have the knowledge that I have, and I struggle to understand it. So
agreed. So just because I on Facebook even I was going to start reading his posts, Jean-Luc O'Neill, for anyone who doesn't know, and he is incredible. But if I haven't got enough time to read a post, I kind of get partway through and I'm like, I need to come back to that later. I haven't got the headspace right now. So yeah, agreed. Whereas I found less stuff has been, the balancing movement stuff is
easier. So Jean-Luc is an absolute genius, and what he's done with very, very lame horses, rehabilitate them from quite severe kissing spine and very severely lame horses that have got navicular, horses that have had broken bones that have been basically written off, and and he's he just trains them all up to like Grand Prix dressage for something to do, and and succeeds, and he is a master of what he does, but he's very, very technical, very, very complicated in his explanations of everything, and a lot of people can't digest that. And I started to realize that people just, because people, your average horse owner doesn't have the anatomical knowledge and the biomechanics knowledge, they find it very, very difficult to understand what he's going on about. Whereas the balance through movement method is far, Celeste is fantastic in the way that she delivers it for people. She's very approachable. She comes across as being really kind. You ask her a million questions, and she's really enthusiastic, and she explains it in a way that is plain English for us all to understand. So that there's definitely real value in following her and using her methods, and I'm using it on my own horse at the moment, and I'm finding he's improving. He is improving hugely, and I've picked up on an imbalance in him through this movement that perhaps I hadn't picked up on before, and so that definitely is a way to improving the horses. To say ridden wise, it's more about the sort of lateral aspect, of the sort of the half passes, the pirouette type work. And we didn't call them that, we call them something else. Anything else?
Can you do that from the ground as well? Is it possible to do some of that work from the ground for somebody who's maybe not riding?
You can do it all from the ground. You can do it all. If you have the skill, and I'm not saying I have the skill. I can pirouette and half pass my horses from the ground. There are people who can, piaffe them and whatever. But the really, really important thing is knowing where that rotation is in that thoracic area, in the trunk, in the body. You have to be able to know where that is, I think. And because you will either be playing into the hands of the dysfunction, or you will be correcting it, if you see what I mean. So you need to know how your horse is rotated, if it's rotated, or where the dysfunction is, so that you can do the exercises on the right rein or in the right direction to benefit the horse, not to make the dysfunction worse. And that's really, really difficult to pick, to see it, to work out which way is beneficial, and to be able to look at the posture of the horse and know whether it's cheating in the work, whether it's actually executing that half pass well. For me, when you're riding a horse, you can feel the rotation. Some people are riders and some people ground workers. I am working my horse a lot more on the ground, and I'm enjoying it and getting on with it. But in the beginning, I was a bit like, I just want to get on and ride him. I'd say I was a rider, and I've had to shut up and get over that, because it's not what my horse needs right now. So, but for me, I can feel more when I'm riding the horse. And so I've struggled a little bit in picking up these things, because you're not sat up there being tipped one way or the other. You're not being given that big red flag that says, that's wrong, this is the wrong way. So on the ground, you have to be really good at being able to analyze where the horse is stepping, and look at things like, for instance, if you just watch a horse walk in a straight line, and not putting it into any sort of, just watching it walk in a straight line, look at the fetlocks, and you will see some horses will drop fetlock and not so, and it's overloading the one it drops more, so things like that. And then you would put the horse, so if you were then going to half pass it left from the ground, and you knew that it was inclined to overload the right fore, you would know when you've probably got the rotation right, because you would see that they're even dropping in the fetlock. But you're trying to keep yourself in a balance, and you're trying to control your horse, and you're trying to watch its feet without going like that, and you're trying to see what it's doing with its neck. It's all quite technical, it's all quite difficult groundwork. I think I find it easier to ride a horse. I've got a friend who's, she rides, but she's not a rider. But I've quite often given her horse to work on the ground, and she's brilliant. She just has a thing and can do it. But it's difficult, because you have to be able to see, you have to be able to analyze that horse, analyze how it's moving, try and pick up where the rotation is, then think in your mind, okay, so if that horse overly rotates to the left, I want to get it back to neutral. I want the spine to technically rotate right. How am I going to do that? And half pass is a good one. The horse can't always go there, but initially you might be thinking, well, I want to get the right hind leg under, and I want to control the left shoulder. So it's trying to, so maybe you have the horse in hand, you do a little shoulder fore to try and get the shoulder. But shoulder fore is quite intense. It's a small movement, but it's pretty intense. So you wouldn't try and hold the horse there for too long. You'd sort of move it there a little bit, and then perhaps say, no, it's okay, you can go back to where you are, and can you come back here? And then perhaps you'd say, right, I need the right hind leg to come under. So you do a little bit of work trying to get the hind leg under a little more, and then try and put it together. And, you've got to know, I think this is the other thing, when you rehab a horse, you have to be able to spot the dysfunction. You need to know what happens in the spine and what happens in the body. If technically every horse did every movement perfectly. And so then you can go, well, to get from here to here, I need this movement, or I need that movement. And then it's working out how to get it. And sometimes you have to teach it in stages, because the horses don't understand. So as I say, sometimes you have to perhaps teach them how to move the shoulder over, and then you have to teach them how to put a hind leg on, and then you say to them, and then we do it, and we can rotate the spine at the same time. And, it's breaking it down for them. But it's quite tricky. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's pretty tricky. I don't really know where the Celeste work goes after the pillars, to be honest. I haven't seen much on the page about that. But the science of motion work very much goes beyond that, very, very much so. And it's all about function of the spine. It's all about the rotation being correct, and it's all about knowing, in pirouette the spine does this, in half pass the spine does that, in shoulder in it does that, in piaffe it does that. Therefore, if the horse has this dysfunction, this exercise is where you need to get to rectify the dysfunction to get muscular balance and function again. But it's not entirely easy. In fact, it's not easy. It is quite tricky. And then otherwise, poles and things. A lot of people like poles for rehabilitation. the thing with poles is you have to make sure that the horse's posture is good going over a pole. A lot of people think the point of a pole is to get from one side to the other. Yes, to a certain degree, but it's how you get from one side to the other. So, you know, I'll see horses going through trotting through 4 or 5 poles, 6 poles, whatever. They're on the forehand trotting through them. And, you know, you think you need that horse up and trotting through them up and staying up, not vaulting over its front legs, you know, diving through them. A lot of the times with raised poles, you'll see, so, I mean, if you watch horses that jump, and you see the ones that jump and skew every time, they've got a thoracic rotation. Their thorax is rotated. You know, and you'll see sometimes horses that go through raised poles, and they'll go through and they'll and they'll very much rotate more one way than the other. And so, you know, you're seeing there where the stronger rotation is, but you have to ask yourself, are we doing anything to rectify that by doing this exercise? No, not really. I think pole work could be good if people were more aware of the posture of the horse as they're executing the poles.
Yeah, and I agree. So I think for obviously I use pole work sometimes more for creating correct canter for jumping and stuff as well, which is just like not a rehab course, so that's a slightly different thing. But in terms of what you're sort of talking about, I find walk poles are often more because you're at a slower pace where you've got control's maybe not the best word, but I suppose more control over what your horse is doing.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
I think it can be easier to to be able to rectify any postural changes, or to see that they're coming, or to notice it. Whereas in trot, where they're using maybe a bit more just speed / forward momentum.
Yeah, and you know, and again, some of the sort of raised pole work you'll see, or even sometimes, with the horses with just poles on the ground, people are impressed by them picking their feet up high, but they've dropped the thorax to snap the hocks up. So, you know, you've created one thing maybe at an expense of something else. So you have to be sort of, you know, do I really need his hocks to flex that much? Do I need his thorax up and his, you know, so he's not rotated one way or the other? Yes, if you want him to stay sound. So yeah, there is, I do think there is a place for poles. I used to say no, I used to say, God, no, I hate poles. I do think there is a place for poles, but I think it's being aware of the horse's posture while they're doing it. And and I think people learning that it's about more than just getting from one side to the other or building pretty patterns on the floor. They've got to actually be beneficial. So so I'm not entirely against poles anymore. I've changed. But you know, that's kind of the way it is, isn't it? You know, we learn stuff and we think, oh, actually, you know, and I don't mind being told or thinking, oh, perhaps actually what I knew then isn't the same now. You know, that's evolution of, you know, us and, you know, education, isn't it? It's
totally. And that's why, you know, as part of what I'm sort of where I've been going with the coaching and stuff, the whole informed to perform side of things, is how much extra information, not trying to be something like you, but the things that I can pull in from people, you know, like you, or even coaches that use different methodologies or whatever else. Like, what else can I pull into what I already know that then gets people to understand better how the horse is moving, why it's moving like that, what we can do to affect it, what issues it might cause. So that idea that actually it's like, okay, you want to go and compete this weekend, cool, let me just, that's your decision, let me just highlight the things that are going on, which are why I think it's not the best idea right now.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's and there are an awful lot of competition horses that, you know, that are struggling, that could do with people having just that little bit more knowledge, or not being afraid to go and ask somebody else. I mean, I sometimes say that the equestrian world is actually not a very nice place, because people can be really horrible to each other in it. And it's quite sad how some people don't want to ask somebody else for help because they feel like they'll then be talked about as being someone that didn't know something. And I'm like, no, just go and ask the question and ignore what everyone else is saying, and just think, well, I've now learned something that will benefit my horse, or, you know, I've changed my view on that because I now know this, and that's going to benefit my horse. But there's a lot of people that, you know, feel that they're not good enough, or, you know, that in livery yards that people talk about them, and, you know, and I just think, God, we should all just be wanting to help each other and learn from each other, and, you know, build each other up and boost each other's confidence, and, you know, congratulate each other on our achievements, and not be wanting to constantly put people down.
I think even just putting content out on Facebook and places, or YouTube, or wherever you want to put it, you know, that can be quite nerve-wracking for any professional, like, or non-professional, whatever, but especially for the professionals, because the moment you put a viewpoint up that's slightly different, or maybe you explain it in a way that is understandable, but I don't know, the science behind it might not be, you know that people are going to understand what you mean by that, and understand what position that means I'm putting the horse into. So even if you don't use the exact, like, oh, that's not exactly what's going on in the horse's body, it's like, yeah, but people, you can kind of take that sometimes for granted. But it's so quick for people to, you know, you use one particular phrase, they're like, well, that's not what happens, or that's not what we do.
Yeah.
Very quickly. And so I think even for me, I sometimes go, like, I'm, you know, putting up some school, like, little snippets of schooling videos or whatever, you're like, oh, what if I say here, should I do it, should I not? And I, you know, all I want to do is put it up there so people can potentially be helped by it. But
yeah, and I think it's good, like, groups like your Informed to Perform group are good, because, you know, it gives people that little bit of comfort that it's, you know, within the group, and that they're with like-minded people, and, you know, we can just hope that these sorts of groups grow, and, you know, that we start a bit of a fresh, if you like, where people support each other and, you know, look after each other a bit better, and don't be quite so mean. And it's interesting. I mean, the sort of where with the professionals, I don't think it's quite so bad. I think it's at the lower levels. I don't think it, you know, when I worked in eventing, and, you know, a friend of mine had horses with professional riders, you know, you go to big events and the professionals all, yes, they're competing against each other, but there's no real rivalry there, and they help each other out and lend each other tack, and, oh, I've forgotten my noseband, or so bloody thing's broken its reins, you know, and go and borrow someone else's, you know, and it's all very, but at the lower levels, it's, you know, I see that where, you know, people are unkind to each other, and you know, you just think, well, actually, that's not very helpful, because I think it's stopping people from, you know, stepping out of their comfort zone and asking questions, and wanting to learn, and, you know, and so a little bit that, you know, that's the Educated Equine thing, is like, you know, you come to me and you don't have to ask the questions, I'll try and give you the information, and, you know, but I don't see why people feel like they can't ask about stuff, or, you know, it's quite sad in a way, isn't it, that, you know, we've got these beautiful creatures that we all want to just enjoy, and, you know, we should be enjoying them, and it'd be nice if they were sounder.
Yeah, and there is so much more information out there, and I think that the point is that it's being able to filter it so you're getting kind of the right information from the right kind of people, because that's the problem with social media, with the internet, with online stuff. It's not always easy to know what is the right stuff. And I'm not even saying that I'm always saying exactly the right thing, but I'm always trying to look in the right places for people who are reputable, you know what they're talking about, have been doing it for a while, have the right kind of ethos.
I had people, I had two people having a right pop at me about my last webinar, and I
saw a couple of comments.
Yeah, and I did reply to them quite politely once, and then I just thought, I can't be bothered. Do you know what? Because they're not the sort of people that are going to pay to come to the webinar. They've already decided what the content is, and they've already decided they don't like it.
I very nearly commented when somebody had said about it, I was like, or you could attend the webinar and find out what she means by the lifted back rather than making assumptions about it.
Yeah,
There is an option.
you know,
Yeah, I did see that. It did make me chuckle.
So, you know, and it's just that in the equestrian world that you think is not kind. It's not kind. You know, luckily I don't really care, but you know, you just think that's not kind. So, you know, I just think, you know, that if people have a bit more knowledge and they, you know, they can stand their ground a little bit and, you know, sort of and just help the horses. It's mainly about helping the horses, keeping the horses sound. You know, that's what we all want, isn't it? Happy, sound horses. And you know, I think as well, I mean, I don't really compete my horse. I have competed him, I've shown him and things. I wouldn't really say I compete. I bought him to compete and then obviously found out that there were more issues. But actually for me, I've now decided I'm not going to compete him or show him particularly. I don't think. I mean, I might have a change of heart on that, but at the minute. And you know what? It's really okay.
Yeah.
It was quite nice. I've got no pressure.
And I think what I'm trying to do is almost bridge the gap, because I feel like there's almost at the moment a bit of a separation down the middle of the people going about it, things maybe more holistically and looking at it and trying to make their horse sound, and you know, and then it's all about the well-being of the horse, which it is. I'm not saying it's not.
Yeah.
But then you've got like the other end of it where it's like it's a competition horse, it's got a job, and it's going to do that job regardless.
Yeah.
And I bought it to compete, and therefore I want to compete it now. You know, the whole informed to perform kind of ethos, I guess, is most of my clients do want to compete at whatever level. How do we bring that kind of well-being, holistic approach to equine soundness and stuff into then the performance world?
Yeah.
Where we maybe do sometimes take a bit more time to get there, but we say it is still okay that we want to compete them. You know, it's okay. It doesn't mean you're going against your horse's well-being. It doesn't mean that you have to become this ruthless, hard-hearted, right, must perform and do whatever. How do we merge the two things together? And I guess that's kind of where I sit at the minute, is like somewhere in the middle of this whole idea of we can do both, because we've got information to work with correctly. We can then go and want them to perform and do well. That's okay.
Yeah. And equally, if you compete at a high level and you wake up tomorrow and think, I don't want to do this anymore, that's okay. Yeah. You know, that's so many people feel guilty for not riding their horses. You know, lots of people have horses and don't ride them and feel guilty for it, and then feel that they're the ones that are talked about in the yards because they don't actually ride the horses. And I have a Connemara pony who I don't ride. I work him on the ground, and I do ride him in that I jump on him bareback and ride him down the field. I don't ride him, not ride him. He hates it. He hates being ridden. The minute you put the tack on him, he's rigid and he's like, you know, but he was broken probably at 3 on the Humpfield in Ireland. He's had terrible experiences being ridden, but I used him last summer. I mean, he's a nut job sometimes, but I used him last summer to teach people in handwork because he knows it. And I said to him that morning, I said, behave yourself. Don't mess these people about. I don't want to hear you snorting and prancing around with your tail in the air. Behave. And do you know, it's like those people arrived and he went, come with me. Let me show you. And he was brilliant all day. And, but you know, the minute I put tack on him, his ears are back and his eyes are like fixed and his teeth show and his tongue's bitten between, he like bites his tongue between his front teeth and he's like, and I just think, oh my God, he hates it, you know? So
what's the point?
What's the point? You know, he's brilliant to work on the ground and now he's becoming my teaching pony. But, you know, I used to keep saying, oh, I'm going to get him into work. I'm going to get him into work. I'm going to do stuff. I'm going to ride him. I'm going to ride him. Yeah. Why?
And I think that's it, isn't it? It's there's a term for it. I can't remember what it is now, but basically when you're committed so much to something for a while that then you see it quite often with riders that maybe haven't got quite the right horse, or it's just not gelling for whatever reason. It's not even necessarily that they're not good enough for the horse sometimes, it's just not a gelling situation. And you know, they stay invested because they've been invested for so long, and you know, so it's a hard decision to make sometimes, and it's not.
But you're like, it's okay to give up on that. It's okay.
And I think that's it. It's sort of giving up is always seen as like a negative, isn't it? But actually, there are some things you can give up on, and it can be actually probably a positive.
Yeah, and feels quite a relief when you do. You know, it's. But definitely, I definitely would say that prevention, building your horses up.
Yeah.
In the beginning, working the young horses, you know, so that they are functional, being able to analyze those horses and see where the dysfunctions are, and then being able to work out how to rectify those is the way to prolonging their soundness. And I think that is the way that we bridge the gap between the hard competition and, you know, the nicey is that, you know, I think it's there, but trying to get that to actually be something that's happening is difficult, because you're having to change an entire mindset, you know, of that's been there for generations, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's slow progress.
And I guess the thing is, if you get hold of a young horse, even if it's not at the very start of its career, say you get hold of a 5 or 6 year old that may have been produced to sell, and that's not to say that every horse that's been produced to sell has been done badly, but they've often been taken through the process
quickly
at a certain pace, haven't they? Like that's often what's happened. And I guess the joy of that is, if you then, rather than getting that 5 or 6 year old going, oh, well, it's already jumping around newcomers or B100s, or it's dressage at elementary, therefore we stay there, you go, okay, how about I spend the first 3 to 6 months taking it a step back, which most people will anyway. They want to step back a level from what it's competing at.
Yeah.
And that first 6 months, getting to know it, like you've just said, getting to understand it, where its muscle structure is, where it's weak, where it's strong, what it's already got, what it needs.
Yeah.
So even if you can't start from the very beginning, at least you start your journey with it.
Yeah, completely.
Standpoint, I guess.
Because by the time you've bought, you know, or you, I mean, that being said, I do see old school masters that have been trained, you know, sort of old school ways, and they seem to cope and be sound at 25. But, you know, there will always be.
Some horses will, won't they?
Yeah, there is always the exception to every rule, and there'll always be the ones that get through regardless. And unfortunately, the hardcore competition people or whatever have built their, oh yeah, but I had a horse and I rode him for X years in draw reins and he was never lame and blah blah blah, so it's fine. Yeah. So one horse, you know, and you're like, yeah, but for every one like that, how many, you know, does the system break?
Yeah.
You know, and it's you know, it's more break than don't. So yeah, you know, but definitely if you can get those young horses and you can, you know, unpick a few little things and rebalance them and train them and strengthen them, and, you know, so basically sort of strength and conditioning work with them, then yeah, you should have a good sound horse for years. You know, picking up an older horse that's, you know, lots of people I know, they want to take the ex-race horses, but, you know, you're really giving yourself a lot of work with those. When I see clients of ex-race horses, I'm like, plenty of work to do there, because there's so much dysfunction, you know, and although they are young, they're often very dysfunctional. So, you know, you've got to be able to pick up on what the dysfunctions are and then think, can I really fix that? Can I really sort that out? Or is that one best left there? And I think that's the hard thing. You know, a lot of people can't see that. I mean, I have no intentions of ever buying another horse because I don't like the look of any of them. It's really difficult. It's really hard. I hate it. I was just like, no. Yeah, it's really hard because they all have something, like we all have something. It's whether you can work with it and unpick it and put it back to being functional. But yeah, definitely that, you know, it would be great if everybody started their youngsters like that.
Well, that is our mission. That's what we're going to start. And that's what,
that's what we're going to do.
And I think, like that, and I think just even bringing, you know, when you start to incur a problem, being able to strip it back and take it back to there. And I think that's kind of where I am with a lot of this, with the program that we've done, the 6-month program, which you know, people watching this currently are on, is because you've got the 6 months, you've got time to kind of spend a bit of time unpicking things and starting and then moving forward, hopefully in a logical, progressive process that makes sense. And hopefully,
and it's really hard with horses because, you know, there was a video I shared on my Facebook a few months ago, and it was a chap and he was walking up like a staircase, and to one side there's a trampoline, and he falls off the staircase, and of course he bounces back up, and sometimes he'll bounce up higher, and sometimes he falls off and he bounces back lower, and I thought that's just like, you know, that is like having a horse, isn't it? You get there and then the damn thing's lame, and then you bounce back down here and you start again, and then you might end up nearly where you were before it goes, oh, do you know what, I'm gonna have a bout of colic. No, you're back. And I just thought, back you go. But I suppose all those things teach us, don't they? We learn from all those experiences, and as long as we're learning from them, then they're beneficial.
Yeah, that's all you can do, isn't it, really?
Well, yeah. That's what I tell myself. It's all beneficial, Anita. It's all a learning.
Good for you, exactly. It's all the things that we can then pass on to people, because most of the things I'm telling people to do or not do is because I've done it before and I've made the mistake, or I've seen somebody make a mistake. So, you know, I'm like, do as I say, not as I did, because hopefully then you don't fall into the same trap or pitfall that I did.
I was just about to say that. I was going to say, my mother had this saying, she used to say, and then you came out with it. That's exactly it. Yeah. So, but so yeah, that's is there anything else I think there was a question in the, did you want to?
That was the ground. So yeah, so
you've done that one.
Yeah, I got it. If there's any other questions, then feel free to ask. If not, we'll say thank you to Anita, and I will stop the recording. So yeah, I think we covered quite a lot there. So you'll find Anita on Facebook. So it's Anita Miles Vet Physio is and then Educated Veterinary Physio Therapist, or Educated Equine. And she has actually already got more than anything she said so far tonight. There is a thoracic sling webinar that you did, which is available to get the recording of still, presumably. And then the lifting, which I haven't actually watched it. Sorry. There
was a tech blip.
I did hear there was a tech blip. Well, there is also, but you've got the recording of that one as well.
No, there was a big tech blip.
Oh, tech blip. Okay.
So the whole webinar is going to be done again.
Oh, okay, cool. So there's a thoracic sling webinar. So if you want any more information on what she was talking about with the thoracic sling, I have watched that one. There's loads of photos of what you can look for in horses with underdeveloped thoracic slings and how it corrects and what it looks like. So it's quite an interesting one to watch if you are at all concerned about it, and just more information about it than she gave today. And then the lifted back is the other one, which that was a name that got some criticism from somebody.
Yeah, people didn't like that.
Yeah. But that will probably be going again into some of the things we like Anita's touched on today. But again, if you're interested, keep an eye on her.
I might run that one next week. Yeah, no, there was just a major tech blip and nobody could get in, and because we couldn't get in, and then it wouldn't start, and I forgot to press record.
You're not the only one that's done that. It's fine. So yeah, that's sort of where you can find Anita and the sort of things she's got going on. And then we haven't really sorted this properly yet, but we're hoping there will be some sort of collaboration up here, of some sort of workshop or day camp type scenario. Details to be confirmed.
Bring the skeletons.
Yeah, with skeletons and things going on, combined with some stuff. So yeah, hopefully that's been useful for everybody. I certainly, well, as always, I've learned some more stuff, and anyone who gets coached by me now is going to hear things and be like, well, I know where she heard that one. I know where she picked that phrase up from, or like, I know where she's got that bit of info from. But that's kind of what I do.
I want you to tell everybody about the ribs, where the ribs attach.
Yeah. Well, I already tell a lot of people about the lateral flexion or lack thereof. And I think now I can take that one step further as to how I explain how that movement feels and why it feels like that, what actually happens. So yeah.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you very much for talking to us, Anita. And yeah, we'll hopefully, maybe we'll do this again once we've got some more stuff. So I'm just trying to find the stop recording button now.
Well, thank you for having me.
No, it's been brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right. There we go.